Ladies and gentlemen, a good day and welcome to the STLescope Unravelling the Future series. I am Pankaj Dhawan and I look after investor relations at STL. I'm delighted to have all of you here with us today. Through this three-part series starting today, we aim to clearly explain STL's growth strategy and also create a platform for an engaging conversation with our leadership team who's leading STL on this growth path. Today is the first discussion focused on access solution business. Before we begin, I would like to add that some elements of today's presentation may be forward-looking in nature and therefore must be viewed in relation to the risk pertaining to the business. The safe harbor clause indicated in the presentation also applies to this webcast. I'm very excited to also announce that we have with us today Chris Rice, CEO of Access Solutions business at STL. As the CEO of Access Solutions, Chris is working towards productizing the R&D innovation in the access solution to achieve the technology and market leadership for STL. Chris is a very well-known technology and business leader who brings over 25 years of telecom experience to this role. Prior to STL, he was associated with AT&T, where he delivered on a multi-year technology strategy and vision for both networks and its underlying systems evolution. He also led AT&T pivot to software-defined networking. We also have with us today Mihir Modi, CFO at STL. Mihir is a seasoned professional with more than 20 years of experience in finance, M&A strategy, and general management. As CFO of STL, Mihir is actively working towards delivering consistent shareholder value through strong financial performance. Prior to joining STL, Mihir co-founded contemporary digital media content company based out of Mumbai. He has also worked as Chief Strategy Officer and CFO at various other consumer and content organizations. At STLescope 2021, we said that we see a decade-long network creation cycle has already started, which is driven by 5G, FTTX, and rural connectivity. We also said that we are well poised to leverage this cycle as we have invested in organic capacity and also capability acquisitions, which made our total addressable market increase 5 times to $40 billion. And now we are focused on this TAM, and our strategy is to increase market share in this TAM with 3 growth levers. The first growth lever is grow optical business. The second growth lever is to globalize system integration business and also scale it in India. And last and the most exciting is to build a strong access solution business. And today we will talk about, how are we building a strong access solution business. In the next section, we'll talk about new era of open networks. We'll also talk about the 3 core product areas that we are building to lead in this open networking space. We'll also talk about how we are investing in our key foundational capabilities that will help us to create a business for the long run. And last but not the least, we'll also share some exciting results that we have achieved in a short time span so far. So with this, I now hand it over to Chris to talk more about it. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Pankaj. Appreciate that introduction, and good evening, everyone. Looking forward to talking to you about the Access Solutions business today. So if we can just move into the next slide. So fundamentally, what's happening is there's a disruption that's occurring in some fairly big markets. That disruption relates to what's happening in the wireless space, the 5G wireless space, really relating to how those networks get built going forward. And this is very similar to what happened in the compute space many years ago, when there was a small set of suppliers in that space. They had proprietary vertically stacked systems, and they supplied virtually the whole compute to the whole world. And fundamentally what happened there is there was a fundamental shift into open interfaces, into a new architecture. 2 small little companies at the time Intel, Microsoft led that direction. A student at the time led a novel way of actually selling those in his dorm room, became a very big company, Michael Dell. You may have heard of Dell. And so that led to some tremendous opportunities for a large number of participants in the space that previously weren't allowed to participate in it under the old model. And really, quite frankly, the shift that's occurring now in this wireless space and in the fiber system space toward openness, toward open networking, toward disaggregated systems, toward programmable systems is, no less large in its scope in terms of what it intends to do. These are some very big markets, as you can see down there. Open RAN total addressable market, 5 billion in this year, growing dramatically. We'll talk about that a little bit more in some other slides. And you can see some of the analysts who are predicting some of the growth here of some very large numbers. You see that 250% year on year. But we are looking to participate and kind of ride that wave, if you will, of this open, disaggregated, programmable direction that's occurring in this market and be a disruptor in this space. And we'll talk a little bit about why we think we can be that disruptor and what allows us to participate in this. So next slide. In just some proof points, because this isn't something we just want to happen, the whole industry wants this to happen. And so if you look, you go back to 2018, and there was something called ORAN, which stood for Open RAN Alliance. There were only 5 companies that founded that. But since then, over 29 companies have joined. These are large telcos, people like, AT&T, Telefonica, TIM, large Deutsche Telekom, large companies that make up quite frankly, a large amount of the spend that goes on in this area. And really importantly is recently, within the past year, some of these in the European Union, for instance, have gotten together and created what they call an MOU around, hey, this is the way we intend to buy things going forward. This is how we want to buy products that are addressed in this Open RAN space. And this is a way and timing that we'll go do it in. And so that gave really great market clarity to people who wanted to supply into that ecosystem. And they were followed rather quickly by some similar folks in the Middle East doing that same thing. And so this is an industry-led event that's kind of global in nature, that really is trying to bring this open, disaggregated ecosystem to this space, which has essentially been closed up until now. And I refer you over to the right, and you can see that this is a fairly large market, this RAN market, right? In the traditional RAN, you can see there in that pie, it's $50 to $60 billion kind of range. And even though that won't necessarily grow dramatically from now until 2030, what you can see is the share of that market, the amount that will be spent in the open RAN area is growing dramatically. That's that little slice at 3% in 2021, 2022. And then you can see it growing dramatically. And that's fundamentally part of the shifts that's being driven by the ORAN Alliance folks and the MOUs on the left side. So this is something that's really a market-driven disruption that's occurring. Again, we're looking to ride that wave. Next slide. And so let me talk about go to the next slide, thanks. The 3 core product areas that kind of are our initial areas that we're going to go into and attack this market. And we'll talk a little bit about why we pick these areas. But there's 2 that are going to be in this 5G Open RAN ecosystem. One is the radio units. So when you drive by in your car and you see those things that are hanging on the cell towers there, those radios, and I have a little picture in the background there that shows some of them in the antennas. Those are what we'll be building, as well as indoor units, because importantly, 5G is about outdoor units and indoor units. So we'll have a complete line, which is growing already. I'll show you some examples of that right now. And it's important to remember that as this gets disaggregated, our buyers, our telco buyers, will be able to buy best in breed of various different components from different vendors. Yes, you have to have system expertise to be able to put them together. Yes, you have to ensure that they're still buying a solution. Fortunately, we've built a team that has that capability, and we've got the right relationships to make that happen. But this is important, is that there's now not a need to go buy it vertically stacked from one particular supplier, right? It's something that's now disaggregated. Again, very similar to what happened in the compute space. The other area is this, what we call RAN intelligent controller. And the best analogy I have for you there to think about the RAN intelligent controller, first of all, it's a software platform, but really think about it like, hey, this is the operating system for 5G. So fundamentally, the operating system for 5G that allows third-party applications, really for the first time, to be put on dissimilar hardware and provide functionality, whether that's improvement in services, whether that's improvement in OpEx, whether that's automation. It allows various third-party applications to be built that provide value-added capability to the telcos. And this is that operating system. And this is brand new. Very greenfield, as they call it, not brownfield. It means it exists, but this is greenfield. And we're a leader in this space, and the work that we've done and our efforts within some of the open fora to go drive this. And then the last area that I'll talk about of our core 3 product areas really relates to fiber and fiber systems, like fiber to the home systems. But more importantly than to the home, these new systems, as they become symmetric and become 10 gigabit in nature, higher speeds, can actually address not just homes, but they can address businesses. And importantly, they can address cell sites. So now the available market to these systems has grown as a result of some of the new technology. And they're going through a fundamental shift. It doesn't get the same amount of press that 5G and O-RAN and Open RAN does, but broadband form and other areas are driving the same fundamental shift in that area. Again, a movement toward openness, disaggregated systems, and really software-based systems. And these play into our strengths. So these are the 3 core product areas that we'll use to initially drive the work in this area. And it's important to understand that the team that we built, the core team that we have in India, some of the folks that we've added to it, really have not just this software expertise, but importantly, the overall system expertise to know how to put these together, to make sure they know how to interwork with them, to bring in the ecosystem partners to deliver it. Next slide. And again, I'll just have some very specific, I won't go through all of this, very specific examples of, again, open 5G radios. You see that there's a system expertise that's required to be successful in that area: design, development, test, vendor management, merchant silicon, et cetera. There are some examples of software that we're building to go onto those products. Same thing in the fiber to the home space. Again, building a complete system. And I'll talk about the ecosystem folks that we're working with to build that hardware piece of this. Again, not too dissimilar than to what people do today. They don't necessarily build a factory. They don't have to go build their own silicon. There's merchant silicon, there's ODMs that can help them with that piece. And then they're really primarily software and system shops. And that's essentially what we are. We're a software and system shop in the radio space, in the FTTX space, programmable FTTX space, as well as in that RIC space, right? There is some system piece associated with that. I know it's all software, but how it gets deployed, where it gets deployed, how it's managed, what third-party applications work to ensure that you have seamless interoperability, that's where that system expertise comes in. And that allows us to go, again, address this $5 billion market. And about 40, a little over 40% of that is radio, and the rest breaks up between the other 2, just for information. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we'll talk about some key foundational capabilities that we have in this area. And again, it really goes back to providing this overall solution, because our customers, while they're changing what they're buying, in other words, they're moving from these closed proprietary systems to open systems, how they're buying is not really changing. And what do I mean by that? I mean that they really want to buy an overall solution. They have large networks to go run, deploy, manage, operate, automate, et cetera. They don't want to spend that extra time to make sure that the system itself interoperates. They count on the ecosystem to do that. And for you to be successful in this ecosystem, you've got to have system expertise. And so we've built not only the solutioning and system expertise in addition to our software, we've built those relationships to kind of go make that happen. And a lot of that helps us because we have a excellent distribution channel through our sales channel that was pre-built, if you will, from the fiber work that we had. So those same customers that we have for fiber systems, for fiber connectivity, for optical interconnect, are the same ones that are buying these same systems. So we already have a great distribution arm to go deliver against that. And we're making the right investments in whether it's facilities, whether it's labs, whether it's people, systems, et cetera, to be successful in this space and to grow that talent base that we have. Core set of the talent, well over 90% of it is in India. We also have some other folks in the US that are adding what I would call kind of more telco experience. And I'll go a little bit into the team in some of the next slides. And so one of the things we've done is we've kind of branded our overall solutions, our access solutions under this Axelis umbrella. Accelerate, also LUS for light, et cetera. So this is both a wireless and wireline solution. We talk about the radios that we're doing this, and well, what are the benefits? And I'll get more specific about this, but our customers are seeing a lower total cost of ownership, and typically that's made up of two components, CapEx and OpEx, and I'll talk a little bit about both in the next slides, and also faster time to market. Well, why faster time to market? Well, because a lot of these specifications have been pre-built and predetermined. And so our ability to now go deploy is significantly faster associated with it as a result of that. They're not custom one-offs. These are things that are going to kind of be built to known specifications up front, right? And then obviously for our shareholders, our goal is to drive a gross margin for this that Mahir may get into a little bit later. Next slide. So this is just an example of the areas that we're going to cover, just a little bit more specific. I know I said all these things, but I just want to go in and show this, that you can see the radio systems there. We call it multi-band. They could be single band. That means one frequency band, or it could be two frequency bands, three frequency bands, what our customers need. We're building a complete product line associated with these. And these are the radios that hang on the antennas that you see in the outdoor environment. In addition, 5G is going to be especially useful indoors for what they call Industry 4.0 applications, like smart factories and other things like that. And we're building a complete line of indoor units as well. And one of the things we're doing that we think we've got, quite frankly, a pretty slick product here in terms of its ability to deliver. It basically goes in like a Wi-Fi access point. It can go in unstructured wiring. It takes power over Ethernet. So we've done some pretty interesting things in this space to differentiate ourselves. We're also looking at this Wi-Fi 6 area because we understand that not everyone will go deploy a 5G, and quite frankly, some people might want to deploy 5G and Wi-Fi. So we're looking at that space as well. Programmable FTTX, I talked about that. I think the really interesting thing here is that this is becoming more and more and more a software play, more and more open, which again plays into our strengths, and the growing market base, not just to the home, but this next generation can actually handle small, medium business needs as well as cell site needs, which is really important because everybody's upgrading to fiber and to higher connectivity for 5G as they go drive that into their cell sites. And then again, the RIC, and again, the operating system for Open RAN and 5G, and very greenfield here, believe we're in the leadership position. And so I'll tell you that I've met with a lot of analysts and talked to them. And I remember getting one question around, hey, Chris, if all of this is open and all of this is, well-known and standard-based, et cetera, aren't you just going to be a me too? Aren't you just going to, supply into this? How are you going to differentiate yourself? And so first of all, I felt like I had to remind them a little tongue in cheek here that, hey, and Red Hat was just bought by IBM for $35 billion. So if I get half of that, I'll certainly be really happy. But the open doesn't necessarily mean worthless, if you will, right? I think it's quite the opposite. And then importantly, we're differentiating ourselves on those dimensions that you see on the bottom here, whether it's smaller size, better cost, lower power, easier deployment, simpler operations. One or more of those dimensions is in every one of the products that you see above it for our differentiation, our value add to our customers over our competition. We certainly do that benchmarking. And you can see that two of these, right, better cost, smaller size, are kind of maybe OpEx related, but lower power, easier deployment, and simpler operations are OpEx related. So we're doing CapEx and OpEx, but we have certainly more in OpEx. And that's important because that's total cost of ownership. Total cost of ownership, just so you know, CapEx is somewhere between 20 and 25% typically. OpEx is the remainder. And so when we go make our value prop, we make it on TCO, and OpEx is a very big component of that, 3 to 4 times more than the CapEx. Next slide, please. These are specific real pictures of examples of things we built. I can't show you software. First of all, I wouldn't show you the source code, but if I showed you software, I'm not sure how impressive that would be. So there's a lot of software in addition to what you see here, but these are nice physical products. In fact, my marketing person was saying, hey, do you have one you can hold up? And I don't have one here yet I can hold up, so the pictures will have to suffice. But you can see on the left side, those are dual band, tri-band, as well as single band radios, again, that hang on cell towers that we built for various people around the world. And then again, we make our case for this, and we make our case for why us versus someone else around things like this has best in class size, power to weight ratio. Is it easier to use in the field? Is our software better? Is it a hitless upgrade? Hitless means, hey, do I have to take it down for a period of time? How long do I have to take it down? Hitless basically means you don't even have to take it down. So those are the kind of things we're looking to do to drive, again, simpler operations, easier deployments, et cetera, associated with it. And again, the same thing on the indoor units that you see over there. Those are our indoor units. And then there's one outdoor unit as well that's small cell that you see there in terms of pictures. But again, goes in like Wi-Fi, works off of power over Ethernet plus, very small size, tunable center frequency, fully O-RAN compliant. That's very important. I should have made that point on the left side too. So we are going to be completely aligned to open networking. We have no issue associated with this because we're building our cost structure, we're building our business plan all around this open networking principle. And one of the reasons we think we'll be successful, maybe relative to some of the incumbents, is that they didn't build their company that way. So their expectations around how the company would work, and maybe they've invested in silicon, and maybe they've invested in other things that, quite frankly, maybe they wish they didn't have on their balance sheet right now. And maybe that if they go and look at this, it changes their margins because of the way they've been selling to date. Fundamentally, you're going to see us, I think, take share in that space because they're going to be reluctant to move in that direction. Again, very similar to what happened in the compute space, if you're familiar with that, in terms of the incumbents being slow and tepid in terms of their movement to embrace the new architecture. We're fully embracing it. We're born to embrace this architecture. We're going to be born on open networking. Next slide. This is really one that talks about the ecosystem. So how can you compete against some of these big people like, the Nokias, the Ericssons, the Huawei's, et cetera, of the world? How can you go and compete? Well, we're not going to compete everywhere against them. We're going to be very direct about how we go and target it and where we go compete. But, thanks to open systems and thanks to some of the work that's going on and the disruption that's occurring, with alliances that we have in the academia area, with these what are called ODMs, original design manufacturers, people who build hardware so you don't have to build a factory. Some of these go-to-market partners who provide either that systems capability, that end-to-end solutioning that you work with, and how you go to market and how you sell to the various customers, or folks who are actually out there with their silicon or their delivery systems and how you go and build some of these radio systems and other hardware components that, while we'll have the systems expertise, we don't necessarily have to have the factory or the silicon to go make that. That allows us to go do this. And again, I hate to keep going back to it, but it just can't be helped that very, very similar to what happened in the compute space in terms of there were specialists who would build chassis, motherboards, et cetera. People would put them together and they get complete systems. They had systems and software expertise. That's exactly our direction and what we're doing here. There's a lot of work going on in this open networking space that we're actually not just participating in, but we're helping drive and lead. And that's important because when we respond to some of the RFPs from our customers, they ask you what you do in this space. They say, where are your people placed? What work are you doing? What have you led in these areas? So that's an important area for us. And again, one of the things you see in the top right there is the software. That's the thing that we want to make sure that we own and we control and that we're delivering on. So there's systems expertise as well as that software. Next slide. And again, there's been a large increase in talent. Like, I've come on board, I think around 7 months ago, and kind of taken some of the great R&D and innovation work that's been there and creating an operating plan, a business plan around this, and creating a business. But they had hired a really excellent team, a core team in India that specialized in the areas that I talked about. In addition to that, company making a big investment in facilities and labs in the Gurgaon area in India that are coming live here early next year. And you can see that while that's a number of 54, that's growing at a very fast clip in terms of our ability to create IPR in this area. Another important dimension as you move in this direction. Next slide. So part of this is like, well, what team do you have? And there's that core team in India that's 200 plus, and all credit to them and that team and what they built in innovation and R&D. But quite frankly, it needed to be supplemented. So again, not taking any away from that team, that's certainly the core team. But how did it need to be supplemented? Well, one was, how about some folks who have like really deep experience in this area who can help advise or direct some of the things that we're doing. So Hank Kafka in the middle there, ex-AT&T, certainly a friend of mine. He's literally the person who helped start ORAN. And so having someone like that and that understanding, and he's still on that board, is a great resource for us. John Metamana, I think a well-known, if you will, industry expert in the IP networking area, helped create AT&T's business there. He's been essential for us in some of the work that we're doing, as well as Guy Lupo, who is at NBN now, but was at Telstra, and created the whole network as a service kind of software model associated with how you deliver the services and the products and services going forward in the TM forum. And so we're really, really fortunate to have those three folks on board as our advisors. And then we've kind of rounded out the team. In addition to myself, we brought in some folks around sales, biz dev, and then, folks who really understand the wireline space, analytics space, people who understand the wireless space. Some of the folks, quite frankly, who were the early inventors and deliverers of the RIC itself, Sarath Puthampura and NK Shankar. Those folks are what we would call the RIC pioneers, if you will. And then Rajesh, our CTO, key technical strength, who leads the product in the technology area in India for that team there. There's a lot of other folks that are in India, around the chief of operations, revenue officer, and everything else. It was a great team to have in place that we're not going into today, but I certainly don't want to take away from the great team that I was gifted when I took the job. Next slide. So I think this is a build. We just might want to build it, but the customer wins, North American telco area, 5G dual band, tri-band radios, and we'll see some revenue starting for that in the late second half of this year. Some top fiber to the home suppliers, pilots and proof of concepts completed there, and some of this was in the press with our programmable FTTX and the value that brings and what they're seeing there as they transition. So there's a transition going on in this space, from PON, gigabit PON to 10 gigabit PON. And as they're moving to that, and as they're looking to satisfy not just fiber to the home, but to the business and to the cell site, we're seeing more and more opportunity there for some of the things that we've built. And you can see some of the recognition below, right? This is always good to see this recognition from folks outside the company who are talking about what you're doing and embracing what you're doing. Next slide. Okay, maybe we skipped one. Did we skip one? Okay, so I think the thing that I'd say here is that I just leave you with the fact that a very large market that is going through some fundamental shifts. The trends are all in our right direction for this disruption to occur and to be a disruptor in this space. Some really big opportunities for us. To be successful in doing that, you need the right team. You need to make sure you have the systems expertise, the software expertise, the distribution. We have those fundamental capabilities in place, the right relationships with the ecosystem. This is occurring in the fiber space as much as the wireless. The wireless gets a lot of that credit and a lot of the press, but it's occurring in both places. I really excited about the opportunities that we have in front of us in this area. So with that, I think that's our last slide, and let me take it over to Pankaj.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for that insightful session. And now, we'll open it for Q&A. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll open it for Q&A. You can either send your questions through chat, or you can raise hand, and then we'll take your question one by one. So first question we have from the line of Sunny Gosar. Sunny, you can ask your question now. Please go ahead. Hi, Sunny, you can ask your question now. Your line is unmuted. Okay, maybe we'll take that later. The next question is from the line of Mr. Tejas Seth. Tejas, you can ask your question now.
Yeah, hi, good evening, Chris. Thanks for this insights. I have three questions. First is on that $5 billion opportunity as on today. How much is our addressable market there? Second question is, how typically is the business sourcing done here? I mean, we directly deal with the telcos, or there is someone in the at a leadership level as a company which does the integration of all the vendors in the Open RAN, and hence you deal with that system integrator, and that's how the business development is done. I mean, we would need a larger tie-ups with these system integrators, or we can directly deal with telcos. That's my second question. And my third question is, how sizable do you see this segment can be for Sterlite, let's say 3 years or 5 years down the line?
Okay, great. Hey, thanks for that, Tejas. And let me answer some of these. I'm here. You can certainly chime in if you'd like on some of these. But I think I'll just go back to that pie chart that you saw, and you can see that there's a very big, like, let's say $50-60 billion market associated with this for all of RAN, right? And then you say, well, hey, I want to go and take a look at what part of that is Open RAN, and that's like 3%. So this is going to roll out under that scenario that we showed there in terms of timeline associated with it. So while it's fairly small now relative to the overall size, it does get much bigger. That's number one. But remember, there's pieces of this that are made up of a variety of different things, like deployments, and this is what they call the software CUDU, which is a baseband unit, and then the radios and the RIC, et cetera. And so what we see is the numbers that we showed you in terms of the size associated with it. How it rolls out is somewhat dependent on the deployment of this, but with, again, the EU folks and the folks in Middle East talking about what they're going to do, we see more and more opportunity associated with this, right? And so I'm probably not getting exactly to that number that you said, but I will tell you that there are a lot of industry analysts that point to different numbers, and so that's why I'm hesitant to just say here's a specific number associated with what it is today, right? And let me get back to the, hey, how big can this be in 3 to 5 years for us, right? We certainly think that's in, again, probably let me here confirm this or not, but we certainly think this is in the hundreds of millions of dollars or more for us in that kind of time frame. We think there's that opportunity for us to go after in that kind of time frame. And then let me go back to your second one, which is around the sourcing. And I think the short answer is it depends. And so let me tell you why I say that. So for things like the RIC, for things like the macro radios that hang on the cell towers, And for things like the PFTTX, those are things that we sell directly through our sales channel to the telcos because that's how they buy it. In other words, there are people who are buying radios today. There are people who are buying SON systems, which are probably similar to the RIC, what the RIC might replace. And then there are people who are buying kind of FTTX systems for, their home broadband. So that's directly through into the telcos, if you will. And then there's a question around, well, what about the indoor units? And I think the answer there is, while some of that may be sold directly to the telcos, we do believe that some of those will be sold through system integrators, right? And so that's where I think they primarily come in. I do think that these folks are natural partners of ours, if you will, or natural ecosystem partners of ours. And what I mean by that is that going back to the telcos want to buy solutions, that typically what we would do is there'd be a piece that those folks would get from the telco, there'd be a piece that we'd get, and then there'd be a connection between us to ensure that the overall solution is correct. So in that way, there's someone that we would certainly work with and someone who can help us as we go down this path. And you can see some investments that other folks are making in this area. But we expect what we're doing in the spaces that I've described, whether it's the radio space, the RIC space, or PFTTX space, will be differentiated enough that when they need to, they will come to us for that when we're not selling directly to the telcos. So hopefully that gets to your questions.
Yeah, it does answer. Just on the sourcing side again, typically what is the product approval cycle here, and is that something little very long driven, and hence the business coming to the books will be little back ended on 3-year and 5-year horizon? Or is it the product approval cycle?
I think it's typical of the telco ecosystem. And so if you look at that and say, well, that's kind of like a longer cycle, then maybe that's true. I don't think that is as true in the enterprise space or in the indoor units, right? I don't think you'll see that there. I also think that once O-RAN starts getting deployed, you'll see a faster cycle for the RIC, because there's some operational savings that can occur as a result of that. But I do think for the radio units, those are typically CapEx driven, planned year plus in advance. So I do think that'll have that same model that exists today in the space associated with it.
Okay, Chris. Thanks for answering.
Sure.
Thanks, Tejas. Chris, we have a question on chat, which is from Mr. Jay Tejwani. He wants to understand how are the incumbents, for example, Ericsson, etc., responding to the threat of O-RAN?
Yeah, I guess it depends on who exactly. I won't say exact names, but I'll just tell you a variety of kind of responses. There's a lot of chatter about this. In fact, the FCC in the U.S. actually, held hearings around O-RAN and Open RAN, and is it really cheaper, and does it provide the value that it says it's going to provide, et cetera, because they were hearing kind of quote unquote back channels through some of the traditional folks that it wasn't. And quite frankly, they're after they went and did their due diligence and brought people in and looked at the data, they said, look, it's nascent, which is true, but it does pretty much provide the value add that it says it did. And so I think what you're seeing, and again, not too dissimilar to what you saw in that compute space many years ago, is there's a little bit of what we would call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that they're trying to put into the ears of the folks associated with it, to understand, like, well, hey, you won't get this or you won't get that. But some are embracing it more. I think you can see that, like, Nokia seems to be embracing it more than Ericsson, and more than Huawei for sure. So I think that while there is generally reluctance to embrace it for some of the reasons I've mentioned, I think you're seeing some are embracing it. That might have to do with kind of their position, if you will, within the market associated with it. But all of those folks, just to so you know, one of the reasons is all of those folks were built on a fundamental different business plan or different business model. Many of them, for instance, have captive silicon still. And now that merchant silicon does it, are the volumes really there internally for them to have that? Does that become a detriment rather than a benefit? Many of them have kind of large factories that they've built as a result of this. And again, with the distribution of the ODMs in this space, does that really make sense? And I think you're going to see some, again, fundamental restructuring and shifts have to happen before they can fully embrace it.
Sure. Thank you so much. We'll have the next question from the line of Mr. Pranav Kshatriya. Pranav, your line is on. Ask your question, please.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. My question is, regarding the, typical sales cycle. I mean, I understand that Sterlite is trying to address various parts of the pieces. I mean, there is software on one side, there are antennas and other things on the other side. So in that context, should we see more, the hardware type sale or more equipment sales initially, and then eventually, 2 to 5 years out, more solution-led sell, that kind of evolution for this access services, or this will be more of a mixed, type of sales? That is my first question.
Okay, well, let me answer your first question. I think I heard. I'll be honest with you. I was having there's a little noise on the line, so I was having a hard time. So I'll answer what I thought I heard, and if it's wrong, please let me know. But what I heard was, what does the sales cycle look like, and then is it kind of more one-time sale? Is it recurring, and what does it look like? And so let me try and answer that. So first of all, one thing that you should be familiar with is that even in radios, but generally speaking, in all the products that I showed, all of these areas are much more software based than their predecessors. So for instance, even if you look at a radio, the interface on that radio is now digital. It's not analog. There's software associated with control plane, management plane, ORAN specifications, et cetera, that is still dynamic, that still needs updates. So there's more of a recurring revenue associated with that in the software space, even in radios, than there was in quite frankly, preceding radios that didn't exist. And this really has to do with easing of deployment and vendor interoperability and et cetera. And that's one of the reasons is driving that. And obviously that same thing is true in, like, let's say the PFTTX space, where, there's a system that goes out, but then most of what we've done there is software, and we've made that very upgradable, almost plug and play upgradable, associated with what we're doing. And so there's recurring revenue associated with that, but we also make sure that, when folks go deploy that, and maybe after the 5 or 6 years or whatever that they want to go upgrade it, that they're able to upgrade that and update that again, maybe to get to those business customers and to get to the cell sites, even in a bigger way than they are today. So movement from 10 gig to 25 gig, which is in the next direction there. And then in the RIC space, that's obviously all software, and the various models we'll use, or we're still working on how that'll be done, whether it's a one-time sale with maintenance, whether it's a recurring sale. I'll be honest with you, I personally think a recurring sale makes more sense, just because there's a lot of update associated with that, and the number of applications that want to get put on top of it will be growing with time, and then folks will want engagement from us to help make that happen. And so I think you'll see a little bit more of a recurring model than a classic kind of one and done model, if that was a question. I hope it was, but I know I answered that.
Yeah, thank you. My next question is, regarding, pardon my ignorance, but I'm just trying to understand where exactly this Sterlite solutions will fit in. I mean, on the one hand, you have, the players like the Altio Stars and the Mavenairs of the world, who have created this software stack for ORAN or vRAN, whichever you want to call. And then you have the system integrator like the IBMs and the Tech Mahindras of the world, who basically does the integration from the telcos side. And because these are all, standardized kind of hardwares. So to that effect, where, those can be procured from various suppliers. So where exactly will the Sterlite the big solution will fit in? That is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. So while things are open, I don't want to have folks. I will have misinformed you if you leave thinking that anybody can just go do this. So what I want to make sure of is you realize that we put in those 3 or 4 years and built the team in place that's capable of taking kind of the ingredients, if you will, and producing the finished good. And that finished good still has to be every bit as performant, every bit as reliable, every bit as capable as what the kind of radios they're buying today. I don't think you can just go, again, find these anywhere and hey, I just go pick these up at the grocery store. That's not what I should have left you with. I think the fact is that if you build the right team, put the right team in place, the capabilities are there. If you have the right relationships with the ecosystem partners, again, that whole little spectrum that we showed, whether it's academia, whether it's silicon, whether it's manufacturing partners, that's all still necessary to do that. And so I believe that we provide a significant value add to the industry and to our partner ecosystem in what we do. And then to your point around, well, what about the Mavenir and Altiostars? What about the kind of system integrators? There's really kind of 4 pieces, if you will, to this that maybe will help you. And at least I think it will. Let me try. So there's the hardware components themselves that make up the solution. Part of that is what we're building. Part of that could be the hardware CUDU, which is typically on Intel, but there's a hardware solution stack to this. And then there's software associated with it. We'll have software for the radio system. Mavenir or an Altiostar will have software for the BBU or the CUDU, as they call it, as you said. And then there's core software, whether that's on site, whether that's in the cloud, it doesn't matter, but that's the software stack. And then there's someone who puts all that together and importantly connects it to the BSS systems, the back office systems, the business support systems of the telco itself, which is really where a lot of the system integrators come into play and still have come into play, right? And so those 4 pieces are still necessary, right? That didn't change. That's the how. That how didn't change, but the what they're buying. In other words, rather than buying that all from one company, one of those vertically stacked companies, they're now able to buy it in this manner. And you say, well, didn't that make it harder? Not really, because the interfaces are open. They can buy best in breed. And I'll go back again to the compute area. For instance, you can look at Dell as a hardware supplier, but Dell also provides SKUs with software preloaded, right? And they work with that software company to make sure it comes preloaded and works out of the box, right? That's the kind of fundamental cooperation that will be required and I think that we'll be a part of. And that's why that system expertise is so important. Does that help?
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. Thank you so much and best wishes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pranav. So Chris, we'll have a next question from the line of Mr. Anish Moonka. Anish, you can ask your question now.
Yeah, thank you. So this was mentioned in a white paper published by Tech Mahindra recently. The major challenge with disaggregated RAN is systems integration. Breaking apart a monolithic system inevitably has costs, as well as issues associated with the responsibility for the overall solution and end-to-end service assurance. It is unrealistic to expect that a majority of operators will integrate disaggregated RANs themselves outside the lab at production scale because the costs are likely to be uneconomic relative to classic RAN. Your thoughts on the same?
Yeah, I think, first I did read that. So first of all, I think that it would depend on the particular telco and their comfort level and their expertise. Like I worked at one who certainly would be capable of doing that. And then if you apply that kind of NRE to go put that solution in place and then amortize that over hundreds of thousands of cell sites, I don't know that that's uneconomical. In fact, I'd argue it's not, because I think when I was there that we proved that it wasn't in other areas, not necessarily this area, but in other areas. But then there will be, I agree, there will be other telcos who maybe don't have that expertise or aren't comfortable doing it. And they will rely on this kind of what I would call cooperative approach again, not too dissimilar to what happens in the compute industry, to provide that overall solution. And I will tell you though, that having gone through this, there is a level of effort to make sure that these pieces, as they describe it, work together. But that level of effort is quite frankly smaller than, in terms of cost, the cost to put this into the BSS system, right? That IT to network connection typically is the longer pole in the tent compared to the other areas, because the other areas are on well-defined open interfaces that aren't perfect. I agree, they aren't perfect, but they're well-defined and open, and they're dynamic, and they're getting closer and closer to perfect. Like every specification will have a Rev B, a Rev C, et cetera. And that'll become easier and easier and easier to do. But that connection into the back office system or the business support system to the IT part of this is not, standard, is different, because somebody used vendor A, vendor B, vendor C for that. How does it connect? And so I think a lot of those comments that were in that white paper, I would at least attribute to that last thing that I just described, rather than that what I would call network string of equipment.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. That answers my question.
Sure thing.
Thanks, Anish. We'll take the next question from the line of Mr. Nirav Dalal. Nirav, you can ask your question now.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I had a couple of questions. First is, what would be our target market, geographical market for our hardware, or for our radio and the hardware side of the business? And the second question is that how important would be partnerships specifically for our software side of the business? How should we look at the growth in the software side of the business, whether it will be partnership-led driven, or how should one look at that?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Nirav. Good question. So let me take the first one. So the geographic targets we have for this are areas where A, Open RAN or O-RAN is being deployed, and B, we have sales coverage. And so, fundamentally, that's like most of the world outside of China, right? For us, right? That's big order of magnitude, correct? And because almost everybody in the world, different parts of the world, are deploying or going to deploy this equipment, have committed to deploying this equipment over some period of time. We don't really have coverage in China, and they are still kind of maybe a little bit more of a closed market compared to an open market compared to others. So that's the short answer to that. If you have a follow-up there, I'm glad to take it after I answer your second question. I think your second question around the software piece is that, we'll deliver the full system for PFTTX, which is, again, a system solution, but hardware kind of built with and through aligned partners, ecosystem partners that'll have the STL name on it, but then it'll be our software on top of it. We'll deliver that directly to telcos. I believe we will do the same thing for the RIC. Now, the one caveat around the RIC is that you really have to drive a developer ecosystem associated with it for the third-party applications. And there may be times where that third-party application has a relationship with the customer and they need the platform to come in place, in which case we certainly go to market with them and through them, right? And again, I will tell you that same thing happens in the radio, where some of the partners you talked about in the CUDU area may have a relationship with the customer, and we'll go to that customer through them. And quite frankly, it's happened on the reverse side too, where we've had the relationship and we bring them in. And so I think you'll see a lot more of this kind of cooperation or ecosystem alignment associated with the solutioning here.
And thanks for that. And just in terms of competition on the software side, how should one look at that?
Yeah. So again, on the software side, let me just not take the radio piece, because most of that is fairly standard. But like on the PFTTX, that's driven by the broadband forum. It's driven primarily by the telco operators. And a lot of the incumbents have a system to sell that they've already put their non-recurring engineering into, and they're not necessarily keen on going and creating yet another solution aligned with this. So they'll more naturally try and sell what they have on the back of the truck. So there are other competitors in this space, maybe some smaller ones, but not many of the big ones have necessarily made this shift yet. Although I think if they see this starting to go the direction I believe it will, where more and more and more telcos drive this and ask for this, and now they have a way of getting it, that they'll eventually go in that direction. But the question is, how much will the market have moved by then, and how much share can you capture before that happens? And will they ever get to the right price points associated with it? I think in the RIC space around that, I would say that we see some competitors there, but one of the things we're trying to do to differentiate ourselves in the RIC space is we don't really want to own those third-party applications. And there's a reason for that, because you say, hey, that's more market, why wouldn't you go after that? Well, one of the reasons is that one of the strong reasons people want to go deploy this RIC, this operating system, is it allows third parties to attach to it. And there's some question, quite frankly, of whether you can truly be a disaggregated operating system if you own all the applications or own some of the applications that go on top of it. And do you provide a fast path for your applications that maybe third parties don't get access to? And is it a fair system, right? And so I'd argue that it's important to be like the Switzerland of RICs. That's what I tell my team. We want to be the Switzerland of RICs, such that any third party would have an opportunity to put their application on top of us, and they know that they'd have a fair application to go do that. And quite frankly, the telcos would know that, and they'd know that the application would be portable, because we're going to be as adherent as humanly possible to the open specifications. Whereas some of the folks, let's say folks who maybe have already done something in this space or have their own third-party application, may not be quite as compliant associated with this. And part of what we want to go do is drive a certification, a testing and badging of compliancy to openness. And I won't go into exactly how we're doing that yet, maybe at a later date, but that's part of what we want to do, is to get truth and information, if you will, out there for the telcos so that they know and can understand what to expect in this space for the software.
Right. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your.
Yeah,
Sure.
thanks. So Chris, as we are almost at the end of the session, and I believe we did skip one slide. Talk about that right now. I think Isha, if you can go back to that slide, and we can talk. Yes.
Yeah, no, okay. This is the one I was going to get to it in the questions, but nobody asked. So I'm glad we have a couple minutes to talk about this. And I think this is a really important slide, and that's why I remembered it out of the whole deck. Is Facebook is really driving, Facebook connectivity is really driving this kind of a mantra for internet for the rest of the world, or whatever words you want to use. Part of this is why they created the TIP, the telecom infrastructure project, which is now run more broadly than Facebook, has a lot of telcos in it and has a lot of engagement. But one of the things that Facebook does is they kind of scout the market and say, where are their gaps in terms of products, and how can they go jumpstart that by, incenting someone to go build products in that particular space, right? And one of the things they did was, there were two areas where in the radio space, this macro cell radio space, the things that hang on tower, they said, hey, we're kind of missing some things in this area. We need someone to go do it. And I think it's a great validation in quite frankly, something that's really important, that speaks to the value that the team brings. And going maybe to one of the questions that came about, can't they just kind of go buy this anywhere? Why buy it from you? Is it the value that the team brings, and the value, the experience that's been created at STL? They came to us to go build 2 radios, right? And so just so you know what that means, is they incent us by paying us to go build these. And then they actually even help us market this to specific telcos, because telcos drive them to say, what kind of radios do we need? What should the specifications look like, et cetera. And so we're super excited to be working with Facebook Connectivity in this area and delivering these 2 radios. We hope that there's more to come. We understand that we won't be the only ones to do it, but it is a very small select set, and we're one of that small select set. So I think it's a great validation of our approach and of the market, and quite frankly, of the team that we've put together.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. So because of the paucity of time, we've now come to the end of the session, and I would like to give it to Mr. Mihir Modi for the closing remarks.
Great.
Sure.
Nice speaking with you all.
So thank you, Chris, for doing this, and Pankaj for taking us through this as well. I would like to thank all the participants for attending this Unraveling the Future series under our STLescope interactive activities and events that we hold, and for showing interest in our company. I hope we've been able to address all your questions and comments. If you have more questions or need any discussion or interaction, please feel free to get in touch with our investor relations team, and we really look forward to continuing the conversation with you as well as your support in the future. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Mihir. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
All right. Take care.